With a few exceptions, in the Western Church, the Lord's Supper is only celebrated periodically. Some churches do it once a month, some churches do it once every 3 or 4 months, some churches almost never do it. Thankfully, there are exceptions. Now the question is, what's the big deal? Why should we be celebrating the Lord's Supper more frequently than that? It should be special, shouldn't it? Well, this misunderstands what the Lord's Supper actually represents within the context of Christian worship. When we read the New Testament, what we in fact find is that the stated reason for coming together as a congregation was to break bread together, was to eat the Lord's Supper. Paul in Acts 20 meets with the church on the first day of the week to break bread. He also says to the Corinthians in his first letter that when they come together as a church, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper, and the reason is because they are abusing it. But on the flip side of that, that means that the proper stated reason to come together is to eat the Lord's Supper. Why would it be that the Lord's Supper was practiced this frequently? What is the big deal? Why should it be practiced every week? Well, one of the reasons why we ask that question is because we misunderstand what its character actually is. We tend to think of it as a remembering exercise on our behalf, a handy tool to make us reflect upon the death of Christ, and we close our eyes and think about Jesus and so on. But in 1 Corinthians 10, what we actually learn is that the Lord's Supper is not only communion with Christ himself, it is communion with one another. The Lord's Supper is our mutual participation together as a body with Jesus. And when we enact this ritual, what we are actually doing is we who are many become one bread. We are bound together in covenant together. So part of the reason why we ought to do it every week is that when we come together, we are being established as a community, as the body of Christ gathered together. Another reason is that when we come together as a church, what we are actually doing is not simply going to engage in certain activities or even to hear the preaching, which is very important and part of the core of Christian worship, but it is to meet with God in covenant renewal. And please do take the time to watch my other video regarding Christian worship as the day of the Lord, called Do I Really Need to Go to Church? The point is that God has chosen to meet with us in worship, and this is where he brings his promises and he brings his judgments and he upholds his covenant with us. This is kind of like the highlight, the focal point of his relationship to us, and that comes to fullest expression in the Lord's Supper. When we take this peace offering together, we eat with him. So we're not simply doing this as a mental exercise to help us remember the death of Christ. We are doing it in obedience to him, but more than that, we are doing it to meet with him in the fullest way that he has given us prior to the consummation. We should participate in the Lord's Supper every week. There is a real sense in which the worship service is very much incomplete if we do not have the Lord's Supper when we gather. There are other contexts for all of the other things we do. Preaching can occur on the street corner. Preaching can occur in various settings and still really be preaching. The Lord's Supper, however, belongs to the gathered assembly of the church. It is the one unique thing that we do together that ought to be done at the core of our worship. Therefore, yes, it ought to be done every week.